So I want to ask you some questions about your experience. What was it like to be listened to? What was it like to be listened to have the focus on you? Yeah.
I felt important.
You felt important.
And I felt like somebody was listening.
Yeah, like really listening.
That's as opposed to 51 years of marriage with me.
Okay. See, you guys have a new practice to take on.
I don't like when he's listening.
Somebody said something over here.
Yeah, a big hug. I felt embraced.
You felt embraced.
Valued.
Valued.
Affirmed.
Affirmed.
Accepted.
Accepted.
Invited to see something new about myself.
Oh my gosh, is that the most awesome thing? That when we take the time to be listened to, we can actually listen to ourselves. Parker Palmer, in one of his books, he talks about the soul coming out to play. And when the soul feels safe enough, it comes out. And then we have access to our embodied wisdom in a way that we can't quite access unless that soul feels safe enough to come out. And when we're listened to, it seems like that happens. Did any of you experience that in just that little bit of 10 minutes? What else? Yeah.
It was fun.
It was fun.
It creates a different energy in a conversation.
So say more about that.
Well, for me, it's more engaged. Like you're more engaged, and it creates the fun and all the things that have already been mentioned. So it's just we have a hard time stopping.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a hard time stopping.
Can you repeat that?
That he said that it was, what was the first word you used?
Energy.
Energizing. Energizing.
Felt safe.
It felt safe.
It did. And warm.
And warm.
I was pleased to get to know somebody I wanted to know for a while.
So it's an opportunity, it's an invitation that is kind of a safe way to have a conversation with somebody that maybe you've wanted to get to know. And it provides a structure for that. Yeah.
If I were to get together again, it would be with Margaret. That's with me. The carry on conversation with it. You know, at some point, seeing how things are going. Remember we talked about.
Yeah, so there, it's a connection that wherever you meet her, oh, yeah, we know each other in a different way. In our world today, where again we live in a more isolating world and a more fear-driven world, this practice is actually counterintuitive again. It's countercultural. It's actually of Jesus. It's the way. Yeah, back there.
I was going to say, in my conversation with Bonnie, I knew that I was the only conversation she was having. I have a lot of important conversations that are texts. I'm never sure exactly how many conversations they're having until they send me a text to go on to another one. And I realized that we're multitasking, and it was just such a richness just to have someone's full attention.
Yeah.
My conversation with my new friend Bill was interesting because very quickly it became two-way.
Yes.
And I think I actually initially resisted that. I was the interviewer. And Bill kind of told me, well, no, it's okay. It be two-way. But what was interesting by being two-way right from the get-go, we ended up kind of caring very much about the same thing.
trust develop when there's giving and taking, when first you're talking to share something, and then you share something back. The person feels a bit at ease maybe, and that there's trust there. You let your guard down, and you're able to share more the real conversation develops.
Yes, and did you hear how Trey did that? So one of the skills that he did was, again, he made sure that he was listening well. So he said, so I understand this is what you're saying, so he kind of fed that back. But then he also was able to meet her and talk a little bit about his own life as well. And again, this is a learned skill, and what I would say about that is there are some people that you engage in a conversation with and they quickly co-opt the conversation and it becomes all about them. And it's almost, they ask you a question as their opportunity to then talk about themselves. And so when we are beginning this training with people in this practice, the reason why I had one of you kind of be the interviewer-ish and then practice that is to understand that when you're in that seat, your job is to listen for the connections, but not just have it be an opportunity for you to share everything about yourself. You see that shift? So I'm glad that you guys found that dance together, because that's really a natural conversation. And then you actually find those places of connection. And what a gift. Yeah.
I was noticing how easily the room seemed to engage in that opportunity. And then I was noticing as well that much of our church life has structure associated with. There isn't that many conversational opportunities, but when they do exist, they exist around, okay, we're going for coffee now, or we're going to have a small group learning around topic A versus topic B. And you do develop connections in those environments, but they're not quite as open in possibility. And that gathering of, I had 5 of these conversations, and I wonder what's really going on in the community, or what's going on here. I was thinking to myself, we seem to have that structured mostly as leading that through ministers or paid accountable as we go. I'm wondering what that might look like if we didn't do that.
There are plenty of churches out there that actually enter into seasons of listening. And that might take 3 months. And it might be a practice for them. You know, they might start with a group of 5 people that might do 5 one-to-one conversations. But then it can quickly grow into, let's all practice this and covenant together to have 2 or 3 of these conversations. And then to come together and talk about what that was like for us and what we are discerning. Where's the movement of the Holy Spirit for us now that we've had these conversations? Do you see how this contemplative practice helps us get to that? Yeah.
So Beth, I'm curious then, in this conversation you didn't have an agenda, but if you were exploring your vision and mission, can you still have these conversations, like in terms of asking the question, in the light of our mission, what do you care about? Or is that too directed?
Well, so are you thinking about having these within the church itself?
Yes.
I would think that that would be totally fine to bring in your mission or what have you, but I wouldn't start the conversation there. That might be the last question that I have, but I would really want to get to know that person And maybe even in the getting to know that person, you'll begin to have a hunch about the answer to that question. Mhm. So this is not a bait and switch. This is not an attempt to go out in the community and have these conversations in a hopes that these people will show up to church. It's really, the gift is the conversation. The gift is the deep connection. The gift is the opportunity for discernment to that wonderment of where is God showing up and how can I meet Christ there. Any other comments? Yeah.
You spoke about the value of doing it among ourselves inside the church,
Mm-hmm.
and I appreciate that. You still seem to focus on the value of doing it outside the church, which is also important. But one of the things that every community faces is the assumption of essential alignment. And if we only know each other superficially, we concentrate on the need to align over all the superficial things. When you have these kinds of conversations where people can go deeper, it allows us to disagree about some things in our congregational life, and in my experience, come to a deeper, less frivolous sense of what alignment represents for us. And that's very important if we want to turn around and go out into the community.
Exactly. It builds trust. It builds this sense of, wow, I always thought that person was a curmudgeon. And now I've spent 30 minutes with that person.
They are.
And now I've spent 30 minutes with this person, and gosh darn it, I have to love them now. Because I found that spark, their diamond essence, their soul. And oh, wow, what a beautiful gift. Yeah, so it builds those connections that then when we do have those disagreements, we can enter into that space not thinking the worst, but saying, wow, I know you. I know you in a different way. And I can trust that we can have this conversation too. Oh my gosh, and what does our world need right now is that in our age of divisiveness. Okay, are we ready to move on? Anybody else have anything to say about the one-to-one? Okay. What people need is a good listening to. Love that. Yeah, we all need that. We all need that. Okay, so now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of putting all this together. Okay? So I want to talk to you about Lean Startup. And you have another piece of paper here. It's the canvas. There's a book entitled Lean Startup for Social Change, and I'll show you a picture of the book before we end today. I read this book, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I was like, where have you been all my life? A lot of times in the church, how we do things is we plan something, and then we fund it. And then we do it. And we might spend a lot of time planning something and a lot of time seeking funds. And then when we start doing it, we realize that our hunch was totally off and it's not going to work. And we've put all of this we might spend a year or more in the planning of it, right? We might get a big chunk of money to do it. And then in the first 6 months, we get this gut, visceral sensation of, this is a complete failure. Have you ever had that happen to you? Oh my God, I've had it happen to me multiple times. That's why I wish I would have had this book. So that really is kind of an orange value system mechanistic approach to how we do things. In the lean startup, what we do is first we figure out, well, what's the problem? A lot of times in the church, we think that we're the solution to all the problems, and we don't even know what the problems are. Right? Like, if we build it, they will come. We are the solution to all of your problems. So why aren't you showing up? Right? But we really have no clue what the problems are. I will tell you one of my failure stories right now. So, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, I was appointed as a placeholder in a community center in the Arts District in downtown Portland. And I happen to love, as you know, this kind of contemplative, taizé-like form of worship. And I said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start a taizé service in this community center on Thursday nights. And they're going to come because I love this. And what's there not to love about it? So I hired a musician. And the first night, some of my friends came from the suburbs. The second time, some more of my friends came from the suburbs. Probably about in week 6, the only person that showed up was the musician. And then in week 7, when that happened, I said to the musician, let's go out for a drink. And this is what I discovered when I went out for the drink. It took us 3 different bars before we could find a place to sit. I totally didn't know the context I was in. Right? So here are all these people having fun in bars, drinking their spiritual drinks, having community. And I was missing out. Wow. Now that's just one of my failure stories. But I did not know what the problems were in that community. I just brought my fun little solution to, oh, this is how we can connect spiritually. And this is what I'm about because I'm a pastor. Okay? But what would happen if we actually took our missional imagination, that we took this capacity to do one-to-one relational meetings with people in the community, and we really discovered what is it? What are the things that are really bothering this community? What are the things that's getting this community stuck? What is it about my Christian tradition and the way I'm shaped and formed that could be a unique solution to the problems that are bubbling up? Okay, because we bring so many gifts. Who else knows how to form community the way we know how to form community? Right? I mean, we know how to do that. So we need to look for the problem, and then we need to be playful with the solutions. So there's not just one solution to a problem. There's multiple solutions to a problem. But what is the unique value proposition that we bring, given who we are, to the problems that our community is facing? Okay? So it really goes to that Frederick Buechner quote. I love that quote. The place where God calls us is where our deep joy meets the world's deepest need. So who are we? We need to be really clear about who we are and what our passions are and what our gifts are. And that's why that deep one-to-one relational work within the church is so important. Because you might discover some things about your church that you never knew. You might discover some passions about the people in your church that you never knew. And it might be bubbling up right now because the Holy Spirit is priming you for this beautiful work, of which you know not right now, right? And then you go out and you do that missional imagination and those one-to-one conversations in your context. And where do those things intersect? Where does it connect? I'm working with a church right now in Augusta, Maine, and they're in this season of listening. And they know that they want to be about offering the contemplative tradition in their community. They do centering prayer. I mean, a lot of the way that they're shaped and formed is around contemplative practice, and they want to open up a spiritual life center. So they know that about them. And so now they're doing these conversations in the community, and I talked to them last week, and the pastor, number one, she said, oh my gosh, I love these relational conversations. I could do these all day. That's a good thing. And then she said, I can't believe what I'm discovering. She said, I'm talking to all these nonprofits in the community, and all of them are bringing up the fact that there's a lot of brokenness in our community, and that we need healing modalities to help that brokenness. And the healing modalities that a lot of the people are talking about are contemplative in nature, like yoga. And how about that? How about those two things connecting, right? But they would have never known that. So what they know now, what she's beginning to discover is, if they want to step out beyond their church into the community, what would be the simplest path to do that right now? It would be with offering meditative yoga. And so that would be their unique value proposition as their first step. Okay? And then what would they do with that? Okay, so here's my little thing about how important listening is. The one-to-one, the missional imagination. We already talked about that. So what do they do with that? There's their hypothesis. They've done their deep listening, and they know that there's a need for meditative yoga in their community. Multiple nonprofits are asking about this for different people. Some of it is for youth and teenagers. Some of it is for some other sectors in their community. So they're like, okay, so we are going to, we have yoga instructors in our church. We are going to work with these a nonprofit, and we're going to test out our assumption. So our hypothesis is that people in our community could use meditative yoga as a healing modality, and we're going to offer that. And so they do all the prep work for that. They introduce it in their community. They test drive it for a number of weeks or a number of months. Before they even test drive it, they ask themselves, how will we know if this is successful or not? What are the metrics we're going to use to determine if this is successful? They run the experiment, and then after the experiment is done, they review it. What worked? What didn't work? Did we meet those metrics of success that we were looking for? And if we didn't, what do we do now? Or if we did, what's the next experiment we can offer? You see how light this is? It doesn't require a lot of funding. It's a really light touch in building experiment after experiment after experiment to where you're building a sense of momentum And each experiment in itself is a movement of discernment. And then at some point, what they say is in this lean startup model, we really get clear when we come to failure. And as a matter of fact, in this model, they say that all of these experiments are to get you to failure. Because don't you want to get to failure before you fund the project? And then once you get to failure, then you have all this data. And then you're getting to that bottom of that U and that presencing piece. And then all of a sudden there's this pivot that happens. And there's this download, and you know it in your bones. Oh my gosh, we were looking at this all backwards. This has helped us to see we have to pivot right over here. And then you do that pivot, and you're good to go. Okay, so I'm going to leave that, you to macerate in that. Any questions about any of that?
Do you want to give a concrete example of a pivot?
Oh gosh. Okay, so you're a New Start pastor, and I'm trying to think of in my coaching where we've done the pivots. Okay, so there's a pastor, her New Start is in a military community. It's close to Olympia, Washington, in that area. And when she first started out, she did what, we teach people how to do. You try to find your first 12 leaders. And that takes a while to find 12 people. And, when she first got there on the ground, she found her first 12 people, and then guess what happened? Every 2 years, people moved. And she got her lead team, and then 3/4 of the lead team left. And she was starting again. And she had in her mind that she was going to start a traditional worship service. And you need a lot of people to do that, don't you? And you need a people committed for the long haul to do that. And after the second year, she built up her lead team again, and voila, people leave, and she's like, oh, I'm learning about my community. So then the pivot comes. Wow, what I need to do needs to be very simple and eloquent in its simplicity. So I need to, and so what she started was, she called it Simple Church. And it was almost like a messy church experience that they did just once a month. And they could do that once a month. And then the other weeks, she might have a Bible study. Or she might they might take a hike somewhere. But everything that she did from then on was very simple and replicable. Now, just this spring, she and her husband moved to Indiana, and we talked about, this is after 5 years, I was like, well, I think you need to go to your church community. I think this is the end of this church because you're gone. And both of us were just shocked. Because even though that church is maybe 35 people, they're continuing on without her. Isn't that amazing? So that's one little pivot there. Let me see what else I have here. Oh, so let's go to the canvas. we do with this, the reason why it's called a canvas is because you can paint over it. And the suggestion is, if you were actually going to take this back to your church, you'd get a bunch of sticky notes and write all over this thing. It's very malleable. As a matter of fact, in the book, he says if you can't fill this out in an hour, drop it and come back to it the next day. So it's a very light touch that we're doing. And so we start in the middle of the canvas with the value proposition. And we ask ourselves, what are the problems? What value are we creating for our targets? So then let's move to the target section. What are the people that you're trying to create value for? So for example, in this church in Augusta, maybe their first target are youth in abusive families and this nonprofit that they want to partner with to provide yoga meditation for youth. So that would be their target. Their target would be two. It would be the nonprofit, and it would be the youth that the nonprofit is connected with, okay? So what are the types of people we're serving and interacting with? And again, when we do this, we really want to, when we're testing out our hypotheses and running these experiments, we don't want to go for the toughest people in the crowd. We want to go for the people of peace. We want to go for the bright-eyed people. We want to go for the early adopters. We want to go for the folks that have actually vocalized the need, right? We don't have to be like Steve Jobs and create the smartphone for people that don't even know what a smartphone is, right? We don't have, that's too complicated. Okay. So when we look at the targets, we say, who are the people your innovation is going to serve? What is their relationship to the problem? And what are the characteristics and the values that they hold? Okay. We also want to know Did somebody say something?
We're wondering if you're reading from this.
I'm reading from my notes.
Okay.
Sorry. I added notes to that target place. And we also want to know what would be the potential stuck points? What would be their opposition? What would be their yes buts to what we're trying to, the solution or the hypotheses or the test that we're trying to do? So that we have our value proposition, we know what the problems are, we know what our unique value is, and what one potential solution could be. That's our hypothesis. We know who our targets are. And then we go to what type of relationship does each type of target and partner expect us to establish and maintain with them? So there's some clarity that has to happen, right? So this church in Augusta would have to go to that nonprofit and say, what kind of relationship are we going to have together? What can we do or can't we do in order to maintain this relationship, right? So you have to talk about what's the covenant here together. What relationships do we already have? And how much will these relationships cost? In time? In money? So we need to be aware of that. And then the channel or the pathway part is, how are we going to reach those targets? Where are we going to meet those targets? Are we going to reach them through community centers? Are we going to reach them through social media? Are we going to reach them through whatever it is, through events? How are we going to reach those targets? Okay? And if you can fill out that right side, the value proposition, targets, relationships, and channels, then you move to the left side. And then you say, okay, so what's going to be our first experiment? And what resources will we need to do that experiment? And who can our partners be for that? You have any questions on this?
So this is a task after the listening has happened.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we are tomorrow, we're going to be like test driving this. For those of you that come back, we're going to be practicing this. So it's good to just get in the practice of filling this out and then realizing, wow, what's missing here? What do we not know that we need to know? And then that can be your movement forward as well. Okay?
In healthcare, we have, it's called a PDSA cycle. Are you familiar with that? Plan, Do, Study, Act. So you would just say, is it possible? Well, let's just try maybe 3 people and see if we can do it with 3 people. And then if that works, we'll expand it. What do we need to do it with 10 people? So is that sort of what you're talking about?
Yes, it's the test drive.
Test drive.
How can we do this with minimal financial undergirding to test our hypotheses? Because in business, as in anything, any innovative thing, 80% of our hypotheses are failures. And what we do in the church is we get to that failure point quite quickly and we say, we tried that. Or we go to a committee meeting and we say, hey, we have this great idea, and somebody there that has a lot of history said, we tried that 20 years ago and it didn't work. Right?
It worked this time.
Yeah. But we didn't even do the work 20 years ago to say, well, why didn't it work? We don't do that assessment piece very well. So with that, I'm going to give you a break, a little coffee break. Come back here at 2:45.